My name is Wynne Coggins. I am the USPTO's Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, and it is now my great pleasure to introduce a very important person to us here at the USPTO. He is a remarkable leader. He is a person that within 6 short months of taking the helm here with us has made and continues to make a tremendous impact on the intellectual property community. Please join me in giving a warm USPTO welcome to the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, Andre Iancu.
That's great. Okay, great. Thank you, Wynne, and good afternoon, everybody. And for those of you who are online, I'm not sure that you are online yet. Welcome to you as well, or whenever you get to see this, welcome. It's great to kick off our USPTO speaker series. I'd like to welcome those here, as well as the employees remotely and in regional offices. Earlier this year, at my swearing-in ceremony, I noted that throughout the course of my career as an engineer and then as an IP lawyer, I have seen firsthand the life-changing, history-altering impact of innovation. And I also mentioned the importance of recognizing and indeed celebrating the excitement of invention and the benefits it brings to society, because doing so enables our prized intellectual property system to fully realize its constitutional mandate to promote the progress of science and useful arts. And that's what this new speaker series is about. In our work at the forefront of innovation and entrepreneurship, we meet some of the most interesting people, Americans who are actively working to make the world a better place. So we want to give all of our employees the opportunity to meet these same folks. So every now and then, the series will feature American inventors and entrepreneurs who will share their remarkable personal stories of invention, innovation, entrepreneurship, or leadership with our employees. And that's important because every member of the USPTO team plays a vital role in achieving our mission. Whether you're a patent examiner reviewing new technologies, a trademark attorney helping businesses and entrepreneurs protect the brands they rely on to fund new ventures, or any of the hundreds of people working to keep our lights on, or our computers and phones connected, or our employees trained, your work makes innovation and entrepreneurship possible. As you know, we recently issued patent number 10 million in a signing ceremony at the White House. Dr. Joseph Marron was there, and he explained directly to President Trump what he invented. More specifically, Dr. Marron, a recognized leader in optical and laser sensing technology, was awarded patent 10 million for improvements related to a field called LADAR, which is similar to radar but uses lasers instead of radio waves to detect objects more quickly and with higher precision. And exactly how he did that, I will leave up to him to explain the details. As a principal engineer fellow with Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems in El Segundo, California, Dr. Marron has over 30 years of experience in developing optical and radar imaging systems. At Raytheon, his work has centered on laser radar, but before joining that company in 2012, he worked at Lockheed Martin. And prior to that, he was the chief executive officer of a small company that was acquired by Corning. So not only is he an inventor, he is also an entrepreneur. Starting with a 1991 idea to improve upon bifocal lenses, Dr. Marron is the recipient of more than 20 patents, as well as the author of over 60 publications. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Marron.
Thank you, Director Iancu. And I know that many people in this room have worked on the celebrations associated with Patent 10 Million, and then many of you others have also dedicated your careers to the preservation and identification of intellectual property. Thank you very much. I'll now spend the next several minutes talking about my Alice in Wonderland journey through intellectual property and then becoming the recipient of Patent 10 Million. I grew up in Western New York in a family of 7 children. I was the middle, and I knew that I always wanted to be a scientist. My first major purchase was a programmable calculator, and my first term paper was on the physics of soap bubbles. I eventually went to college, and there I naively decided that I would be a physics major, an electrical engineer, and a computer science major all at once. Turns out that that didn't go very well. Being at the University of Rochester, though, I became an optics major, which is kind of a famous, Rochester is a famous school for the study of optics. There I ended up being able to study holography, lasers, telescopes, imaging systems. It was great. I sailed through the program and was fortunate to receive my PhD. By sailed through, for those of you who have done sailing, you know it's a lot of work and takes a long time. So then, as a research scientist, my primary job was to come up with new ideas, scientific theories, and then typically publish them. Although sometimes when an idea shows good commercial promise, it's good to patent it. So I started my first position at a research institute in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and after a short while I had a good idea. As Dr. Iancu mentioned, it was for a type of bifocal contact lens that was an improvement on Ben Franklin's original invention. I submitted a disclosure, then a patent, and before I knew it, a patent application, and then before I knew it, the patent had issued. A company then contacted us and that wanted to commercialize it, so we sold the patent to them. I made some money, not a lot, but I was hooked. I was hooked on the idea that I could come up with an idea that was actually commercially viable and then get paid for it. At my job, I continued to work on a variety of projects and again came up with a good idea that I thought was a good idea. It was for a device called HoloVision. It was a laser-based system for making measurements of precision machined parts, such as automotive parts. And my first job, I think I mentioned it was in Ann Arbor. We were close to Detroit, which is the automotive manufacturing center of the country. So this HoloVision invention was very well suited for that marketplace. The invention started to proceed, and eventually we built a prototype and did indeed discover that we were getting some commercial interest. So we decided to go to a trade show. Before going to the trade show, though, I contacted our patent attorney, and he told me that the trade show would constitute a disclosure, a public disclosure, and that I would need to submit any patent applications that I wanted to prior to the trade show. The trade show, though, was a week away. So I spent the next week working tirelessly with our patent attorney, preparing what ended up being 5 patent applications that formed the basis of the invention. We then were able to go to the trade show, showed the technology, and I learned a lot about preparing for a trade show, doing customer demonstrations, and such. And it turned out that the trade show was pretty successful. It was in fact so successful that the company I was working for decided to sell the technology, and me along with it. I evaluated the opportunity and decided that it wasn't quite for me. I knew that I had all the basic skills that I needed to start my own company, and that I would prefer to be the owner of a business rather than just working for one. So with my wife Becky's permission and my children carefully observing, I quit my job and started my own company. Life was good. I worked out of my basement. I had my optics, a little machine shop, electronics, and computers, and was on my way to starting a new company. Most days it was just me and my dog. working in the basement, and I would joke that he was my lawyer. Based on previous experiences, I was able to develop a regular pace of just doing small things each day at a time, knowing that eventually I would be able to build this technology. Then one day there was a knock at the door. It was a person I didn't recognize. He asked me for my name. I confirmed it, and then he handed me a nice big envelope. I quickly realized that I was being served. I was being sued by Holovision, the company that I had started and then left. This was very difficult because it amounted to several people that I knew very well trying to block me from pursuing my livelihood. I quickly realized I also needed a new lawyer. I found that after some advice, I knew to go to the best attorneys in Ann Arbor, and I showed them the envelope and explained my story. The suit had to do with definitions of some specific intellectual property items. They then explained that I was in pretty good shape, but that the suit would probably take a year to resolve itself. We quickly developed a defense and countersued, and then went to our first hearing, all with working very long hours. It was very difficult. We went through then months of depositions, and eventually Holovision decided that they would be better off dropping their suit, and we settled. I was able to get back to my laboratory. However, it was after much pain and stress. I got back to machining parts, configuring lasers, and programming computers, electronics, things that I really loved to do. And eventually I had a prototype of the new technology. Based on my Holovision lesson, I knew that disclosure was a very important thing, so I contacted a patent attorney and then went through again the technology, and it turns out that I came up with 5 patent applications that we submitted to the USPTO. At about the same time, some companies were showing interest in my newest technology that I called light gauge. One of the features was that in it I had developed a $300 homemade laser that had the essential performance of a $30,000 device. Thus, my unit was a very low-cost system. One of the companies that showed interest in the light gauge technology was Corning. And after going through several discussions, one day I had Corning representatives in my basement with my dog, and I was able to do a demonstration of the prototype. They were impressed, and we mutually decided that we would do a business deal. That was wonderful. However, once again, I entered a year of great stress, working through many documents and lawyers, and I had to explain to my dog that, again, I needed a new attorney. He was okay with that. And then after a year, though, that's how long it took for the deal to go through, and then eventually we had the deal to sell the technology. And much of the value associated with the company had to do with the 5 patent applications that were pending. Our family then left Ann Arbor and moved back to Rochester, New York. As part of the business deal, I needed to do tech transfer and became an employee of Corning. After spending about 3 years at Corning, we had the new family of products developed and launched them. And then, career-wise, I decided that after that I would leave Corning and become a consultant. I consulted to a number of companies. One of them was Lockheed Martin, and they eventually asked me to become an employee. I was very excited to reduce my stress level, and after also achieving some major goals, having a small business, selling it, having approximately 20 patents, I decided that kind of a slower pace would be good for me. So with my wife's permission, I accepted the job and we moved to Boulder. At that point, too, our children were grown and attending college. At Lockheed, my position was senior fellow, which is kind of like being a tenured faculty member. My job was to do research, and at Lockheed, it was much more defense-oriented. I was firmly a member of the National Security Innovation Base, where our job is to develop new ideas and technologies, mostly for defense, but sometimes commercial applications. After working at Lockheed, doing several inventions, by the way, over that period, inventions that I'm very proud of. After 6 years, though, I got the itch to get a new job. I took an interview with Raytheon, and after interviewing in the Los Angeles area, I took a stroll down to Manhattan Beach. There, it was beautiful. The beaches, the weather, it was always perfect. So I then convinced my wife, Becky, that Southern California was the place to be. So we loaded up the truck, and there, it is indeed very nice. The weather is much better than in Rochester. At Raytheon, I began working as a principal engineering fellow, similar to Lockheed, and after a while, I had a great new idea. It was for coherent LiDAR using intrapixel quadrature detection. I submitted a patent disclosure and then eventually an application. I continued to work on other inventions in the meantime and submitted other applications. And after a while, I talked to the IP department about this patent, as I knew it would soon issue and that it had strong commercial applications. We came up with a plan for commercialization. However, since the patent hadn't issued yet, we didn't execute that plan. A few weeks and months passed while I was waiting for the patent, when this June I received somewhat of a cryptic email message. I was on a business trip. It came up on my iPhone, and it said that I was invited to a telecon the next morning concerning one of my patents that was about to issue. I quickly realized that this was probably pretty good. So I attended the phone telecon, and on it were representatives of the USPTO and our company. From having a feeling of that this was strange, it quickly turned into a feeling of excitement as people were excited to hear me on the telecon. The representative from the patent office, whose name I don't recall, explained to me that the patent would issue and that it would be the 10 millionth. I knew this was a big deal. My first patent was in the 5 million range, and those after that increased in numbers into the 9 millions, but I wasn't aware that the 10 millionth was about to issue. The representative of the USPTO explained to me that it was not only a big deal because of the 10 millionth, but it was an occasion that the USPTO wanted to celebrate. And in this occasion, they were going to introduce a new style for their patents. And then also, being the 10 millionth, it was a great milestone for our nation's innovation and intellectual property. The representative also explained that it was a big deal for the whole Department of Commerce, because with the current trade negotiations, a big part of that is our intellectual property basis, and the fact that we need to do a very good job of protecting it. He also added that no patent had been signed by a president since Gerald Ford signed the patent for the bicentennial in 1976, so that the president would like to sign the patent. Wow, this was a big deal. It was a very big deal, but at the same time, we were sworn to secrecy. So I knew that one of the biggest achievements of my life was about to appear, but I couldn't talk about it. Nonetheless, I had a smile on my face for the next several days while we waited for the event to occur. I did some training with corporate to sharpen my interview skills, and then I also had a very nice conversation with Director Anku about the invention and my background. Then the days passed, and the final signing event was to occur on June 19th. The days passed quickly, by the way. And then on the Sunday before the event, I traveled to Washington, D.C. On Monday, I met with our corporate communication people who knew that this would be a big news event, so they trained me to again sharpen my interview skills. And we also came up with a way to describe the patent. Rather than saying coherent LiDAR using intrapixel quadrature detection, we decided that it would probably best to call it a new type of digital camera for measuring speed and distance. This would come in handy later. The big day soon arrived. The announcement occurred in the morning, and it was starting to be on some of the news sites. So I started to receive congratulatory emails and phone calls from my friends. I also did a radio interview with Kai Ryssdal on NPR that was aired later in the day, and I received more emails and phone calls from my friends, some of them shocked. As time got closer, it became more and more certain that the signing would happen. For those of you who live in the DC, I'm sure you're much aware of it than I am, but things can be chaotic here. In the morning, we weren't sure that the president would actually sign the patent. It might get postponed or it might not happen at all. However, as the day progressed, things were looking good. I put on my suit, went down, got an Uber, and began one of the most intense Uber rides of my life. I arrived at the Eisenhower Executive Office building, said and mentioned to the Secret Service that I'm here for a meeting with the president. They said, "Sir, that's great, but you're over an hour early." I guess I was a little nervous. I continued to wait near the gate, and soon members of our team arrived, including the CEO of our company, Tom Kennedy. I hadn't met Dr. Kennedy before, but soon got to know him, and it was great to meet him, being one of 60,000 employees at the White House. We waited longer, and then soon were brought by the Secret Service through the gate. We went through the first gate, then the next gate. We started to see more Secret Service. Some of them were visibly armed, and then it happened. We were in the White House. When I went in, it was a little surprising because it seemed smaller than I thought. The rooms were small, the doorways were small, staircases narrow, but this is indicative of it being a kind of an older building. Once there, we did small talk, and we learned that the King and Queen of Spain were having a meeting with the president before us. Wow, we were going to be right after royalty. Our lineup started to take place. The president's staff members told us where we would stand inside the Oval Office. And then it was our turn. As we walked in, I made a mental note to try to remember things, as this was going to be a very special occasion. As we walked into the room, the president was sitting at his desk doing a pre-read of the patent documents that he was about to sign. When it came to my name, he asked for the correct pronunciation, to which I said, I was able to get it out, though. And he said, "Thank you," and that he had a very good friend with the same last name. The president was then, and then in the room also were several members of his staff, and then several people also from the USPTO. The president was then directed by his staff to start the ceremony, so he began to read the documents. The camera shutters clicked rapidly, and after the official reading, he signed the patent documents and then shook our hands. After that, he turned to me and said, "Dr. Maron, what is this patent about?" And I was able to say, "It's a new type of digital camera for measuring speed and distance." And he said, "Very interesting." And then he added that his uncle, John Trump, was a professor at MIT who had been involved with the early development of lasers. We posed for pictures, and then after about 15 minutes, the event was over. I had officially received the 10 millionth patent, and it was signed by the president. Wow, that was a great moment of my life. Later that evening, the USPTO hosted a celebratory event at Mount Vernon that was attended by several members of the legislature, Department of Commerce, and USPTO. My wife Becky and two of our children were able to join us, and it was a great event that capped off an awesome day. Now I've been back at Raytheon doing my normal job for several weeks. During this time, I've done several more interviews and have become somewhat of a celebrity within Raytheon. My nickname is 1E7, which, when translated to geek, means 10 million. Key elements of my job at Raytheon are to invent new technologies that are primarily used to defend our country. This is an especially important job as we now consider some of our adversaries to be peers on a military level. As I've experienced throughout my career, our patent system is the basis for protecting and defining much of this intellectual property, both domestically and internationally. And I'm very grateful knowing that the USPTO and Commerce Department are dedicated to this cause. Also, as I've discussed, I'm very grateful to the job that the USPTO does in defining, differentiating, and protecting intellectual property. This has allowed me to pursue many of my dreams, including fulfilling my original goal of being a scientist. And I'm now using that as a member of the National Security Innovation Base. Thank you. Certainly.
All right, just one moment. Here comes a mic.
You know, I'm a big fan of the indie inventors, the garage inventors, et cetera. And it seems to be you had a period in your time where you were that. And I wanted to say, from your perspective, was the intellectual property part the most protective of you? Or what do you think was how valuable the IP protection was for you to break through with the indie inventions? And the second question I would have, would you think it would be harder today to go through the process with the present patent laws, et cetera, or do you think you would have the same type of experience that you did? But, and also, thank you for your contribution and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's see, for the first part of the question, the IP process in patenting is very important to me. And as I mentioned, it has a big part in forming the valuation of a company. And then also, it allowed me to clearly define what my inventions were so that as I moved from company to company, I was able to point at the documents, the claims, and define very carefully what belonged to whom. Then for the second part of your question, associated with the current laws, I'm probably not qualified to answer that question. When I do an invention, I talk to our attorneys who help me through that process. So unfortunately, I can't answer that in a qualified manner.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
Thank you for coming today. During your experiences as an entrepreneur, aside from the patent office, were there other government or federal resources that you found valuable during your time in that area?
It was actually, primarily the patent office. As an inventor, I did not want to accept money for SBIRs because I didn't want to divert myself from my own goals. So, I decided to do it on my own, and I think my biggest government partner was indeed the patent office.
So we have about 87 folks online right now. So for those of you that are online, please send us a question and we'll run that out here to Dr. Maron. Does anyone else have a question? Andre.
Thanks again, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Can you describe a little bit the inventive process you went through to come up with the new fancy, fast digital camera? Obviously without getting into any confidential information.
Yeah, certainly. So for me, the process of invention typically involves an aha moment. And I usually go through a filtering process where on one day I might have an aha moment. Then I sleep through the night and wake up the next day. And if it's still a good idea, I know that it is indeed pretty good. Then each day after that, I continue to evaluate it. And then after 3 or 4 days, I typically know that it's a really good idea. And then depending on whether it's just basic research or something that's commercializable, I'll decide whether to submit a disclosure or not. So, yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
What advice do you have for new or aspiring inventors, lessons learned that you wish you had known?
Let's see. So the number one thing is to pursue one's curiosity, and then in that pursuit, try to guide yourself by science. Like, look at the facts, evaluate whether or not your idea is good, be critical, but continue to move along and be guided by science. And then the other thing is perseverance. Inventing and then producing a prototype, going through all the processes is very difficult and requires hard work and many long hours. So it's, probably those two things is be curious, be smart, and then be persistent.
And we have time for one last question. Anyone? Hope? See you raising your hand.
I'm actually going to ask this question on behalf of my daughter. And so Jordan is an aspiring engineer, and she wants to go into that field. Her question is, what keeps you motivated and continuing to innovate? And have you ever thought about a different career?
Very good question. So I like engineering as a field because it allows me to work with science and math every day. And then, let's see, could you repeat the first part of the question?
What inspires you or continues to give you inspiration to innovate?
Okay, so it's mostly just love of the process. Just the whole thing of coming up with that idea, filtering it over the days, and then pursuing the underlying science is great to me. And then now I remember the final part of your question, which was, have I considered other professions? It's a funny thing because, being a scientist is a long career, and I have many friends who are attorneys, physicians, and other types of professional people. And I'm very happy that throughout my long career, I continue to do what I've always wanted to do. So speaking for myself, I haven't really considered anything else. I'm just happy being a scientist and engineer.
Dr. Maron, we want to thank you so very much for your time today. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining us today.